This Monday saw a high-level virtual United Nations meeting of heads of state and government to discuss the Financing for Development in the Year of COVID-19 and Beyond initiative. In Cuba, phase 3 clinical trials of the Abdala COVID-19 vaccine candidate began this Monday in Havana with 150,000 volunteers. The colossal container ship that halted global trade through the Suez Canal was set free this Monday, bringing an end to a crisis that blocked one of the world's most vital maritime routes for nearly a week. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. This Monday, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, together with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Prime Minister of Jamaica Andrew Holness, convened a virtual meeting of heads of state and government to discuss the Financing for Development in the Year of COVID-19 and Beyond initiative. As part of the event, several heads of state and government, including Argentine President Alberto Fernandez and Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, among others, stressed the urgent need to help developing countries to have equal access to vaccines. They also urged the International Monetary Fund to reduce the debt load of these countries so they can finance their vaccination campaigns. During his statements, President of Venezuela Nicolas Maduro highlighted the damages caused to the Venezuelan people by the unilateral and coercive measures imposed by the United States. According to the UN Secretary-General, 3 immediate steps must be taken. First, a debt standstill for all countries that need it. Second, debt relief for highly indebted developing countries. And third, improvement of the international debt architecture to make restructuring exercises more efficient and fair. And speaking as part of the high-level meeting of heads of state and government, the UN Secretary-General called on the international community to support less developed countries in the midst of the COVID-19 health emergency.
Countries need access to additional liquidity to respond to the pandemic and to invest in recovery, and the international community must urgently provide the necessary support to all developing countries in need. I am encouraged to see that our insistence on the need for a new allocation of special drawing rights by the IMF and relocation of these unused rights to support the most vulnerable countries, particularly middle-income countries, is now gaining widespread acceptance. So let us make sure that it does and that this initiative is properly managed.
As part of his statements during the high-level UN meeting this Monday, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro stressed the importance of working together to overcome the pandemic.
Distinguished Antonio Guterres, Secretary-General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government. Today, I am taking part in this event to highlight the importance which Venezuela places on building the path together in order to tackle these extraordinary circumstances facing mankind. For a year now, the world has been combating an unprecedented pandemic. The economic and social consequences are still unpredictable. In the face of the pandemic, we are all vulnerable, but we are not all equally vulnerable because earlier asymmetries have only deepened further. Any exclusive progress in one country or one region will subsequently lose out because of the spread of the illness in another region. We are not going to overcome COVID-19 in the rich countries until all countries of the world have overcome it.
Also speaking as part of the UN meeting, President of Argentina Alberto Fernandez stressed that the COVID-19 pandemic has no boundaries between states, which is why it requires international cooperation with a focus on solidarity.
The emergency presents itself to us without borders, just as its impact on production, employment and poverty recognizes no boundaries between states. We are facing a new global challenge that calls for a deepening of international coordination and cooperation with a focus on solidarity. Financing for development is key to guaranteeing global recovery by facing the challenges that the emergency has posed. The pandemic of unemployment, inequality, extreme poverty and hunger. In Latin America alone, the number of people living in extreme poverty reaches 85 million individuals.
And in her statements as part of the virtual UN meeting this Monday, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, noted that the COVID-19 crisis has affected poor countries and those dependent on tourism to a greater extent than others.
America's substantial policy response is a good thing, but the unintended consequences may well be higher U.S. Treasury yields, a stronger dollar, which has happened before, will lead to massive indiscriminate reversal of private credit to developing countries. This, my friends, regrettably, is how the health crisis turns into a global financial crisis. And let us remember, 70% of the world's poor live in low and upper middle income countries dependent on these flows of finance.
Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, warned heads of state and government participating in the virtual UN meeting about inequality in the distribution of vaccines against COVID-19, noting that rich countries are responsible for the problem.
The equitable distribution of vaccines could curb the spread of the pandemic and will enable a faster, fairer, and more equitable social and economic recovery, enabling SIDS to perform better in trying to realize the Sustainable Development Goals.
This Monday, historian, journalist and executive director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, Vijay Pashad, led an interview with academic and political activist Professor Noam Chomsky and the Minister of Foreign Venezuela, Jorge Arriaza, which covered issues such as imperialism, U.S. foreign policy and others.
People who take decisions for the imperialist system are not necessarily sitting in the White House. Over the last 20 years, especially after we demonstrated that a one-polar system with the United States within a world capital system wouldn't be possible because of the power that China and Russia are coming up, are emerging, and from our America, the great efforts of our leaders.
Foreign policy. Nothing changed.
Right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Cuba began the inoculation of volunteers with its COVID-19 vaccine candidate in the capital, Havana, this Monday as part of the Phase 3 clinical trials. The vaccine candidate will be distributed in 8 health facilities across Havana, as part of the trial that seeks to determine its effectiveness in 150,000 people in the capital. In total, health authorities hope to reach 490,000 people, both candidates. The National Director for Epidemiology, Francisco Duran, reported that the application of vaccines seems to be the only way to combat coronavirus, but also urged the population to continue applying the established control measures. Paraguayan health sector workers have warned of the huge increase in the number of COVID-19 infections and deaths in the country and the collapse of hospitals due to a lack of medical supplies. Health specialists raised their concerns about what they consider to be a critical situation due to COVID-19. They also warned that the risk of total collapse is imminent due to the lack of beds in intensive care units. On Sunday, the country had 140 infected patients waiting for a bed in intensive care units in different hospitals. Meanwhile, Ministry of Health authorities explained that the increase in the number of cases accelerated the consumption of the basic list of medicines and warned that there were no guaranteed supplies of the necessary drugs in the near future. Uruguayan health specialists have warned that the health system has exceeded the red level of imminent saturation due to COVID-19, with transfers being made between different healthcare centres due to a lack of space for patients with the disease. The Uruguayan Society of Intensive Medicine pointed out that the hospital system is near total saturation, with 295 COVID-19 patients in intensive care out of a total of 800, representing over 35% of current bed occupancy. However, the president of the State Health Services Administration denied that hospitals were facing overload. In this context, at least 40 medical societies and faculties have asked the government for a meeting to discuss the epidemiological situation after registering 1,530 new cases and 14 deaths in the last 24 hours. The Medical Society also raised its concerns regarding a shortage of trained and experienced personnel to attend to the COVID-19 health emergency in the country. According to Colombia's Institute for Development and Peace Studies, on Sunday, 3 people were assassinated in the southwestern Valle del Cauca department. According to local media, authorities confirmed that the 3 people were found dead on Sunday afternoon in a rural area of the municipality of Jaimundi. The victims are 2 men and a woman identified as Ramiro Delgado, Jose Mestizo and Melba Carreño. The killings occurred just 24 hours after the massacre that took place on Saturday in the municipality of Cartago, located in the same department, where hired killers murdered 4 people, 2 men and 2 women. The Institute also denounced that unidentified men killed indigenous community leader Ramiro Ascue Yuli on Sunday. A total of 37 Colombian social leaders have now been killed so far this year. According to the latest polls in Ecuador, presidential candidate Andrés Arauz of the Union for Hope coalition is leading the voting intention by over 7 percentage points ahead of the second round vote to be held on April 11th. According to pollster Perfiles de Opinión, Arauz leads with 37.87% of voting intention, while his rival for the presidency, Guillermo Lasso of the Creating Opportunities Party, has 30.19% support. More than 13 million Ecuadorians are called to vote on April 11th to elect the next president and vice president of the country for the 5-year term starting on March 24th and running until 2025. In the United States this Monday, the prosecution and defense commenced their opening arguments in the murder trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. The public's been banned from attending the trial due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's being live streamed. The trial comes 10 months after George Floyd's killing triggered outrage and protests against systemic racism and police brutality across the United States and beyond. After outlining police policies and the oath that Chauvin took when he became an officer, Special Assistant Attorney General Jerry Blackwell told the jury that Chauvin had betrayed his badge and even failed to get up off Floyd's neck after being told twice that he did not have a pulse. Meanwhile, Chauvin's defense argued over the cause of death, claiming that Floyd had hypertension and heart disease and had recently taken drugs. The highly anticipated trial is being watched closely as Floyd's family and their supporters call for justice over the excessive use of force. Hundreds of people gathered and danced in Belgium as a symbol against the health restrictions imposed by the government. Protesters gathered in a public park in the city of Liege in rejection of the tightening of restrictions, on this occasion including the closure of all businesses involving non-medical physical contact. The majority of those present danced and sang without respecting social distancing norms or making use of a face mask. Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has announced he will resign in April but will remain in office until the parliamentary elections to be held on June 20th. The country has been gripped by political crisis since Pashinyan signed a Russian-brokered ceasefire agreement with Azerbaijan in November that ended 6 weeks of fighting over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region.
Yes, first of all, I will resign in April. Why? I will resign, but in order for early elections to take place, and in the meantime, I will continue to serve as interim Prime Minister.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Salvage teams on Monday set free the colossal container ship that halted global trade through the Suez Canal, bringing an end to a crisis that blocked one of the world's most important maritime routes for nearly a week. The Ever Given container ship got stuck sideways in the crucial waterway, creating a massive trade jam. The obstruction held up $9 billion each day in global trade and strained supply chains already burdened by the coronavirus pandemic. At least 367 vessels carrying everything from crude oil to cattle were forced to wait to pass through the canal, while dozens more took the alternative route around the Cape of Good Hope at Africa's southern tip, adding some 2 weeks to journeys and threatening delivery schedules. More than 900 people from a village in the west of the Indonesian island of Java were evacuated early on Monday after a massive fire broke out at an oil refinery. The fire at the Balongan refinery appeared to start at a set of 4 tanks in the middle of the complex. Hundreds of houses near the refinery were damaged when the explosion caused windows to shatter, prompting the mass evacuation. The local disaster mitigation agency said about 20 people were injured, including refinery workers and several villagers who suffered burns while passing through the area. The chief executive officer of the state-owned oil and gas corporation, Pertamina, said the cause of the fire was being investigated. According to the Defense Department of Mozambique, dozens of people have been killed in coordinated attacks by Islamist militants in the north of the country. Officials said most of the killings took place after soldiers were deployed to the town of Palma, which was stormed by the militants last Wednesday. The government is yet to retake control of the area, but hundreds of people have been rescued from the town, which is a logistics hub for international gas projects worth $60 billion.
Last Wednesday, March 24, a group of terrorists sneaked into the main town of Palma and launched actions that resulted in the cowardly murder of dozens of defenseless people and caused material damage to some government infrastructures.
Tunisians have gathered in the streets of Suez to demand the return of household waste illegally exported to the country from Italy. In 2020, Tunisian customs officials seized 282 containers that had been shipped from Italy and were declared as carrying plastic scrap for industrial recycling. But the containers were found to hold a mix of household waste, which is barred from import under Tunisian law. Italian authorities had given the Italian firm that sold the waste 90 days to retrieve the cargo from December 9th, but the deadline passed without it doing so. Tunisian conservation groups criticised the lack of action on both sides.
There are currently 212 containers in Pier 4 at the port of Suez. There are also 69 containers containing waste at the importing company's warehouse in Mouradin, which is considered an environmental catastrophe.
Hundreds of Lebanese protesters rallied in the capital Beirut on Sunday against a political stalemate that has denied the country a government for months. The protests, organised by Lebanon's Communist Party, blocked traffic in the centre of the city. Lebanon is facing an unprecedented economic crisis that has sent the local currency plummeting, while prices have soared and poverty continues to increase. Different political groups have been locked into a power struggle, failing to agree on forming a government to deal with the crisis. Lebanon's government resigned in August following a massive explosion at Beirut's port that killed over 200 people, wounded more than 6,000 and damaged entire neighbourhoods in the capital.
It is a protest against what's going on in the political issues in Lebanon, as well as the economical situation. The government, as well as the parliament, are seizing all the authorities and are depriving the people of all its rights, the right of living well, the right of having hospitality, having insurance, having money, having income. All these are depriving them, the people.
In Bangladesh, at least a dozen people were injured in clashes between police and Islamist demonstrators on Sunday. The protesters, mostly from the Islamist group Hifazat-e-Islam, were angry at the visit of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi as Bangladesh marked 50 years of independence. They accused the Indian PM of stoking communal violence against Muslims in his country. Since the protests started on Friday, at least 11 people have died after police shot at demonstrators in several districts across the Muslim-majority nation. Madagascar's former president, Didier Ratsiraka, has died at the age of 84. Ratsiraka, former naval officer and one of the promoters of socialist revolution on the island, was in power from 1975 until 1991 and later returned to lead the nation from 1997 to 2002. He was well known for having close ties to the late ruler of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Kim Il-sung, and Cuban leader Fidel Castro. For the past 10 years, he had been present in the country's political scene, regularly invited on television to deliver his analysis. He died early morning at the military hospital of Soavinadriana in the capital, Antananarivo, where he had been under treatment since March 22nd.
Destitué 2 fois du pouvoir.
Cities around the world turned off their lights on Saturday for Earth Hour, a global movement organised by the Worldwide Fund for Nature. This year, organisers said they wanted to highlight the link between the destruction of the natural world and the increase in incidence of diseases such as COVID-19, making the leap from animals to humans. Experts say human activity, such as widespread deforestation, destruction of habitats and climate change, are spurring this increase and warn that more pandemics could occur if nothing is done. Earth Hour seeks to send a message to world leaders that millions of people around the globe demand urgent action in tackling the planet's biggest environmental challenges. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.